solid 2 hours.
Oh yeah, that works. That works for me. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this up or come close to it. So we're looking at the American strategy in the Pacific. Obviously, there's a big debate over who's going to be in command. You got a room of pretty strong. Hang in here with me. Thank you. They got some pretty strong military leaders. So FDR's got some decisions to make. And he doesn't necessarily see eye to eye with all of them. That's why he kept George C. Marshall at his right hand, because Marshall did not play into the politics. So what's ultimately going to happen is the Pacific Fleet, the entire Pacific Fleet, is going to go under the command of Admiral Chester Nimitz, and U.S. Army forces are going to go under the command of an individual that FDR was not that fond of, and that was not that fond of FDR, and that is General Douglas MacArthur. So this is going to be a bit of a joint command. Nimitz, Pacific Fleet, MacArthur, U.S. Army in the Pacific. Here we have Chester Nimitz on the left. There's Dugout Doug on the right. This is who my grandfather fought under. MacArthur there on the right. My grandfather was coastal artillery in the Pacific, served in the Philippines. Talk more about him as we move forward. American strategy in the Pacific continued. Nimitz is going to favor, folks, thank you, is going to favor the Pacific strategy based on advances through the Marshalls, the Caroline Islands, not North and South Kakalaki, but the Carolines in the Pacific, and the Marianas. It's a direct route to Japan. Mason, you alluded to that earlier. Good job. Talking about hitting the more strategic spots. MacArthur would drive through northern Papua New Guinea and retake the Philippines, because MacArthur had been evacuated after the fall of the Philippines to Australia. And that's going to be the jumping off point for U.S. Army. Naval strategy obviously took the highest priority, and you guys did a fantastic job with the driving question. Island hopping is the goal. That is the plan. Get closer and closer to Japan via the Southwest and Central Pacific. So here we got a map of the island hopping plan.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having us. See you later.
We've got the island hopping plan, south, so we're moving south, southwest, and the goal is to get closer so we can launch bombing raids on Japan, possibly a land invasion, but they want to stay away from that. The height of the Japanese offensive, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. I want everybody to pay really close attention to this. The sinking of the British HMS Prince Wales and the HMS Repulse. These are two of the costliest events, the costliest event and one of the most costly defeats that the British had in the Pacific in the entire war. Japanese bombers in an aerial assault took out these massive British battleships. This turns the tide of the war. This changes everything in naval warfare. Everybody realizes after the sinking of the Whales and the Repulse, with the loss of over 1,000 British sailors, this is going to be carrier-based warfare in the Pacific. Invasion of Guam, invasion of Wake, the fall of nearly every Dutch, French, and British colony in the Pacific. Malaya and Singapore fell in February of 1942. This was a huge blow to Allied morale because 90,000 British soldiers were surrendered as a result of this. Burma and the Netherlands, East Indies fell in March, which threatened India, and Japan attacked the Philippines and took control of the Philippines in 1942. The loss of the American Philippines was devastating. The attack happened just after Pearl Harbor, as we already discussed. On December 10th, they destroyed most of the U.S. air power at Clark Field. The U.S. was helpless without air power here. Commanding General Douglas MacArthur really underestimated the strength of the Japanese. Japan took control on January 2nd. U.S. soldiers withdrew to Corregidor at Manila Bay, and then from Manila Bay, they are going to retreat to Bataan. On March 5th, MacArthur evacuates to Australia. On March 11th, he says famously, "I shall return." General Jonathan Wainwright was left in command with remaining U.S. resistance at Bataan and will ultimately surrender himself and nearly 75,000 U.S. and Filipino soldiers at Bataan. So 75,000 American and Filipino troops under Wainwright forced to surrender after a stoic resistance on April 9, 1942. The captives were marched between 55 and 100 miles up the Bataan Peninsula along the infamous Bataan Death March. More than 7,000 died in the Death March that was mounted toward a major railhead to move soldiers to POW camps. Most captives were executed, tortured, starved, died of disease, starvation, dehydration. The most famous way in which they were executed was decapitation with samurai sword.
Mr. E.
Yes.
My great-great-uncle, he was in the Philippines, and he was going to go on the Bataan Death March until he got injured in the hip, and so they just threw him into a room with a bunch of other injured people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting to get his story. That is wild.
Yeah, so good thing he got hurt, because otherwise he would have died.
Japanese conquest of the Philippines, the Bataan Death March, prisoners in the Bataan Death March, POWs,
Yeah. His arm was missing.
prisoners in the Bataan Death March, and then you can see the they're emaciated. But then you can also see down the bottom right the beatings they received as POWs. Clearly, the Japanese are not following what codes? Geneva Convention Accord, right? We're not following the Geneva Convention Accord.
Geneva.
Exactly. So the Japanese strategy in 42, a thrust toward the Indian Ocean, potential move to link up with the Germans. The operation was launched to seize Papua New Guinea and then take Australia, which never happened. A plan to strike against the major American outpost at Midway, which was not far from Pearl Harbor, set up the land invasion of Hawaii. Hang in there with me. Japanese sampled from all three of these strategies. They did have successful attacks in the U.S. Solomons, and this directly disrupted American supply chains coming out of Australia. So now in 42, this is where we are going to pump the brakes. These lines of red are going to represent Japanese attack forces invading and conquering territories from 41 to 42. So what we'll pick up on next is Doolittle's raid all the way through the Battle of Midway. So we'll focus on Doolittle's raid, the Battle of Coral Sea, and the Battle of Midway. Did you guys have any questions? All right.